All right, good afternoon. I guess it's, I have 4:12, so I guess we could start. So good afternoon, everybody. I flew in this morning. I landed at 6:30, so if I start spouting gibberish, that's why. You'll know. So first of all, an introduction to who I am. My name is Walt Miner. I work for the Linux Foundation on Automotive Grade Linux. I've been with the Linux Foundation and Automotive Grade Linux now for 2 years. And prior to that, I worked for some tier 1 suppliers, namely Continental and Motorola telematics. I also worked for some Linux suppliers, particularly Monte Vista. So I've spent a lot of time in the automotive industry and in mobile devices with Linux in general. And I also like to ride a motorcycle, although I don't own that BMW. I like people to think I own a BMW. It makes me seem like I'm very hip and with it. And this slide I showed, we have, at AGL, we have an all-member meeting twice a year. And this slide I showed at our member meeting in Munich about a month ago. One of the reasons I really like AGL is been the opportunity to work with a variety of different tier 1s and a variety of different tier 2s, and the collaboration that people are really showing around automotive, which in my past experience working for a tier 1, it's always been very cutthroat, very dog eat dog. And you can see, I took the Git logs from January of this year through September, beginning of September this year. And you can see we had a number of different people with commits, with 18 different companies represented. And there have been times where we've been integrating software in a room with multiple tier 1s sitting down together and multiple OEMs sitting down together, all working on the same code base. So AGL really is all about collaboration. And you'll see it's not just tier 1s and OEMs on this list, but also smaller companies, some individuals. It's really been a great show of collaboration amongst the members. And if I went back to the beginning of the UCB, or the Unified Code Base for AGL, the list would expand even larger and the number of companies would be even larger. So that's really been the thing that I've been excited about within Automotive Grade Linux. So this is my, by the way, at the all-member meeting, and now here at Embedded Linux Conference, I can say this is your "You Can Be Famous" slide. If you contribute to AGL, even one commit and you'll get on the slide. So you too can be famous. And so today's goal, basically to educate you about what AGL is all about. How to access, how to get to our source code and our documentation, and basically in general generate interest in participating in AGL and show you all the different places that you can participate. Where are you? Sorry about that. So our tagline is collaborating to build the car of the future through rapid innovation. And really, I wanted to show that earlier slide with all the different people who've been committing code to our repositories, that it is really a collaboration. It's not just a few people sitting in a room writing software and throwing it over the wall. It really has been a lot of different people collaborating at a lot of different levels, from device drivers to the test infrastructure to applications. And we've really shown a lot of great collaboration in the year and a half or so that we've had this online open code base. And Dan Cauchy, my boss, made the statement that if Linux is in the car, we want AGL to be, we want it to be based on AGL no matter what the function is, whether it's an IVI system, a telematics system, navigation, working our way into the ecosystem of the vehicle where it is appropriate. And if you saw Greg's talk this morning, his fireside chat this morning, there's still going to be ECUs in the car that are really too small to have Linux, and okay, that's fine. But if Linux is in the car, we want people to think about AGL first. So we really are code first. AGL is a collaboration project of the Linux Foundation. we're leveraging Linux and open source technologies across the board, not just Linux, but all through the ecosystem up into the application space. We're trying to develop about 80%. Our stated goal is to develop about 80% of the starting point for a production project, so that a tier 1 or an OEM could take our code and turn it into a finished product in a much shorter amount of time than they have been. Traditionally, these IVI systems have taken 3 years plus. I think I finished a project when I was working with Monte Vista that I had quoted. We finished the project in 2013, and we quoted it in 2009. So to give you an idea of the time span of rolling out a new IVI system. And we really want to shorten that down to half or less that time. So AGL is a code-first organization. We have some documentation in terms of specs, but we're not focused on specs. We're focused on writing the code. We understand that our belief is that if you write a spec, an API spec, and it's just a document that stands alone, the spec and the code, as everybody knows, tend to drift apart. So really we're saying here's the code, here's some documents on top of that, but really focus on getting the code done first. We have 8 different OEMs that have joined AGL at this point. And you can see that spans from Japan, Toyota, Mazda, Subaru, Honda, Mitsubishi Motors, to the US with Ford, and Europe with Jaguar Land Rover. And we're always gaining new members. We have, at the time I made this slide, we had, I think, 76 different members on this slide. Now we seem to be gaining traction with about a new member every week or so. I think we're over 80. I think we're up to around 85 different members now on AGL. And you can see the level of commitment. We have 4 different membership tiers: platinum, gold, silver, and bronze. So really, AGL, we really believe we're changing the industry and how car manufacturers, how OEMs and tier 1s interact with software, how they interact with their customers, and eventually how customers interact with their vehicles, and how vehicles interact with the cloud. We have members that are focused on all different parts of the ecosystem, from the deep guts of the vehicle messaging subsystem all the way up through the cloud infrastructure and cloud to, I accidentally said this morning, I told somebody it was cloud to ground infrastructure, but the cloud to ground ecosystem. But we really are focusing on all different levels, both with our applications and our middleware. By the way, for the life of me, we had some problems with my slides, and for the life of me, my slides on my screen show up about that big, so I cannot see them. That's why I keep looking up there to make sure which slide I put in what order. So we have, the AGL now has what we're calling a unified code base. Up through, AGL is about, I think 5 or 6 years old. It predates me by a few years. And originally we were using Tizen IVI as our code base. And the IVI part of Tizen kind of went away almost 2 years ago, and in terms of support in the ecosystem. So we decided within the AGL advisory board to take the best parts of Tizen, take the best parts of Genevi, and take the best parts of other open source components and put those together into what we call the unified code base. We first announced that in March of 2015, so about a year and a half ago. And the first release was at CES in January in Las Vegas. That was Agile Albacore, we called it. And it's Yocto, Pocky based, with some AGL specific layers on top of that. And I'll show how we structure the layers in a few minutes. So being we first called this AGL Distribution, and people wanted a better name. So I, being the creative type on the program, came up with Fish. So we name our releases after fish. Agile Albacore was our initial release back in January. In July, we had our Brilliant Blowfish release, and coming up in December, in time for CES of 2017, we'll have our Charming Chinook release. And D fishes were kind of hard, but I came up with Daring Dab. Somewhere I have a picture of one later on. So that'll be our mid-year. So we're on basically an every 6-month cadence, release cadence. And we, along with those releases of the middleware and the BSPs, we also are releasing demo applications. And both at CES this year and at the Automotive Linux Summit in July of this year, we showed some demonstrations of the AGL releases. And there's a video available of the CES demonstration on YouTube that shows what we put together. We put together a demonstration that showed our board controlling an HVAC system, a simulated HVAC system with fans and actuators for the vents, as well as a multimedia system, some navigation, a home screen, things like that. And we keep improving upon that, expanding upon that as we go along. The other thing that, in terms of collaboration, I wanted to mention, at ALS in July, we had released Brilliant Blowfish, and we had 15 different sponsors with booths at ALS. And I was amazed at the number of different applications that people had developed on top of AGL, and I had no idea. I learned during those days, during the few weeks before, people came up to me and said, "Here, look what we've done. Look at this application," and they were showing it at Automotive Linux Summit. So what you'll see in a few minutes, what we've decided to do is kind of open up the ecosystem a little more in terms of demonstrations, and I sent out some calls for participation so that people can submit their applications and have them part of the official demonstrator. Because one of the things that we kept getting questions about 2 days before CES, a week before ALS, was how can I be part of the official booth? So again, if you have an application, you have a cool application, you have a cool piece of hardware, you want to show it at CES or at ALS as part of the official AGL suite, there's now a mechanism for you to participate, and I'll show that in a minute. So as part of ALS, we released our Brilliant Blowfish release. One of the things that we're committed to doing is occasional patch releases, occasional updates. So since then, we've had 2 patch releases. We just made a second one on Friday, 2.0.2. We are using, with this release with Blowfish, we're using Yocto 2.0. We added some additional BSPs on top of what we were showing with Agile Albacore. I've got the list, I think, on the next slide. We added the IVI Audio Manager, which we somewhat borrowed from Genevi, somewhat added some of our own plugins. The IVI Layer Manager, and a significant amount of automated test improvements using Fuego, which I think Tim mentioned this morning during his introduction. So we became one of the early adopters of Fuego. So this was the list of BSPs that we have. We have basically what we're calling reference BSPs and community BSPs. Reference BSPs are fully supported by the manufacturers of the board. They're helping with updating the BSP with integration, things like that. Community BSPs are typically either older automotive boards or hobbyist boards, and they really represent the AGL community best effort at maintaining the BSPs and the applications on top of them. And you can see we've got a pretty wide variety of different boards available. And as we go through Charming Chinook, we're adding to the support for each of these. So, and we're adding additional support for new boards as we go through this process. This is probably a bit of an eye chart, but the qualifications for being a reference board include not just the BSP being maintained by the board manufacturer, but having a documentation and a quick start guide so that you can buy that board, get going pretty quickly, write an application, and have it running in a very short amount of time. A lot of times you get the board and you might want to put some, we'll call it non-standard distribution. AGL would be a non-standard distribution for, say, a Raspberry Pi. And nobody really tells you how to do that. So we're trying to put together a quick and easy quick start guide for each of our boards on how to grab our code and get going. Basically get those builds into our continuous integration infrastructure, our automated testing, things like that. So for the complete list of boards that we have at any given moment, it's on our wiki site. The wiki site will also point you to the source, both the source Git repositories, tarballs for the releases, and binaries for the reference boards that might be available. So for Charming Chinook, which is coming up in December, January timeframe, we're looking to have a complete SDK available for app developers. In fact, we're asking that as part of the CFP that we're doing for CES apps, that any apps that we get from developers run in our application framework, which is being highlighted by our software development kit. The AGL compositor is probably not going to happen in this time frame, but we're working on, we've got someone working on the AGL home screen reference app in Qt. We're also looking at doing one in HTML5. We're looking at adding device profiles for telematics in particular. We've had a lot of interest from the community in adding telematics devices. We've got IP network management in terms of we have Conman in our build, and we're looking to add device management on top of that, as well as some reference applications for controlling Wi-Fi and controlling Bluetooth. Another thing we're moving away from is we have been using a tool called Doors-NG for requirements management. That tool is very cumbersome and difficult to use. There's probably only a few people on the project who actually understand the tool. And by few, I mean one. The other guy quit. So we're trying to move all of our documentation into something standard that all developers understand, which is create the documentation from using Markdown and then publish that directly to the web. So we're piloting that now with some of the documents that we're currently creating, with the idea that I'll move the requirements spec out of Doors-NG and into Markdown, and we'll maintain it that way. The requirements spec that we have was written about 18 months ago, was released during the 2015 ALS, and it's more of a marketing requirements document than it is an engineering requirements document. It really focuses on what we'd like the AGL to be. And again, because we're code first, there hasn't been as much interest in updating the documents. Engineers don't like updating high-level requirement specs. So we're hoping that by moving it to Markdown, we'll at least encourage people to update the document. Just the other tool is just extremely difficult to figure out and not very So the first document we're focusing on there is the AGL security specs. So we have a security blueprint document that we have in progress where we want to at least explain to developers and people who are interested in AGL what it is you get out of the box in the AGL application framework with security. So that's something that's in progress. The a little bit more on the SDK. So we want that available for all of our reference boards with published images and that including the graphics drivers. As you know, anybody who's working with embedded boards, the graphics drivers, the better drivers tend to be proprietary, and we don't have redistribution rights. So we've been working with our board vendors to get redistribution rights so that we can fully publish the binaries and make them available to people. And like I said before, our goal here is rapid innovation, rapid development. And the goal that I put out there is you should be able to sit down and write what I call your Hello Walt application in an hour or less and have that running on the board. And so the first time I tried doing this last year, just prior to CES, it took me, with the instructions that we had, it took me 3 days. So, and it was not a fun process. So getting that down from 3 days to less than an hour is my stated goal here. We'd like support for both Qt and HTML5 based applications, having an IDE with full debugging supported. Of course, documentation, these quick start guides, so that you can get going. You can get your stuff up and running in less than an hour. And one of the difficulties we have now is if you want to use our code, it really does rely, if you want to modify the code, it really does rely on a certain amount of Yocto knowledge. And the deeper you get into it in terms of device drivers or adding new code, there's really a lot of Yocto knowledge that becomes required. So we really want to get it so that the app developers don't have to worry about that. They don't need to know the guts of the build system. AGL Compositor. So there's nothing really out there on the market in terms of open source that meets all the needs for an automotive IVI system in terms of a compositor. So there are, the Qt compositor is very good. Qt has a commercial license for a lot of its stuff, so we're trying to not use reuse the Qt compositor. So ideally, we're looking for a member company to donate a solution. We have a member company that has stepped up and is offering one. They're in the process of clearing it through their internal processes to make sure they can actually donate it, and hopefully we should have at least a starting point for an AGL compositor beginning of next year. I don't think it'll happen for Charming Chinook, because we all know that big companies take a long time to clear things through lawyers. We'll skip this. We talked about network management briefly already. So Daring Dab, which is our next release, middle of next year prior to ALS, we're looking at Smart Device Link, which is the Ford-developed open source Miracast type solution. They've open sourced this. It's primarily, their primary implementation is QNX based, but there is a Linux implementation available, and they've started working with us on porting that to AGL. And then as we expand we've been really focusing on building out our infrastructure, building out the initial application framework, and giving people the ability to add APIs to that. So some of the APIs we want to focus on in terms of reusable components down the road are navigation, speech services, browser engine, so that people can then come in with the applications can have a consistent API, and people can come in and plug in whichever solution they want. And in some cases, like speech or navigation, they could be either onboard or offboard solutions. And we like that as much as possible to be transparent to the applications. So again, we're looking for, we had at our all member meetings, we had some BOFs there with interested parties and looking for donations from members, because we know that anybody who's developed an IVI system already has a speech API. They already have a navigation API. So if we could get one that works, donated as a starting point, that would be the ideal situation, rather than trying to start one from scratch. So one of the questions we got asked originally, in fact, one of the questions I used to ask before I joined AGL is, what is AGL? How do I know what AGL is? So we, this year, through the beginning of through the first half of the year, we worked through how to describe that, and we came up with some requirements for what is the AGL core distribution, what are the extra features, what are the optional things on top of that, what are the more future-looking features that people might be developing, et cetera. So we came up with this concept of the AGL core distribution. So if in that's basically the stable Yocto release that we've decided to use. In the case of Brilliant Blowfish, it's 2.1, 2.0. In Charming Chinook, we're moving to Yocto 2.1. It's those reference BSPs. It's the documentation and tooling that you need to build an AGL, build AGL basically. It's test results that are provided using the AGL test framework, which is using Fuego. Fully supported with updates for at least 6 months, because like I said, we're on a 6-month release cadence. So we've been working through the release management process. We've now made patch releases to Brilliant Blowfish a few times. And we have a Yocto layer called Meta AGL that defines that. So basically what we're saying, instead of having a complicated compliance spec, we have basically use Meta AGL, and that is AGL. So like I said, we're code first. Then we want to provide a mechanism for enabling optional or experimental features. So we developed 2 layers. We created 2 layers. The AGL extras, basically it builds on Meta AGL, it builds on the core distribution. The features are fully tested and are supported as part of the release. We have device profiles that might be supported through AGL extras. We really worked hard on coming up with a name, so of course we called it Meta AGL Extra. We also created this thing called Meta AGL Devil, which is those forward-looking features that may eventually make it into the AGL core or into AGL Extra, so they may eventually be fully supported, but right now they're not. They're being worked on by the community, and we have a process for considering moving them from Meta AGL development to Meta AGL or extras. We provide daily snapshot builds for all of our boards. We may have snapshot builds for the experimental features. It depends on how far into their life cycle they are. We may not. We're basically not providing formal QA for those. The community will do whatever they feel they need to do for QA on those features. And then those community BSPs, those technically would be, I would consider those part of Meta AGL Devil, but it doesn't really fit that model, but that's kind of the way I look at it. And then we needed an environment for demonstrators, for adding applications, for adding code that might be one-shot in nature. Maybe we're using an application that we're creating an application for CES. And we want people to be able to play with that. So we have a Meta AGL demo application. All of our ALS and CES applications are available through Meta AGL demo. So in terms of release management, we're doing twice a year code releases with binaries for the reference BSPs. We eventually may get to a model where we have long-term support. We've had members ask about this, say 2+ years of support as, say, some of our members go to production with a system. We have that under consideration. At this point, we've had no request from any of our members to do this yet, so it'll come. We know it'll come someday, and we're planning for it. Right now, I couldn't tell you which release might end up being a long-term, 2-year plus supported release. But we do provide daily snapshot builds, and for all of our reference BSPs, some of our community BSPs, et cetera. So this in its totality, which is another bit of an eye chart, I'm sure, is all of the different Yocto layers that we have. Not even all of them. There's always more, but this is the basic structure of our Yocto layers for AGL. So, how do you get all this stuff? I'll post this presentation today, so you don't have to worry about getting these links. Some of them are long. All of our pre-built binaries and source tarballs are available at that link, and the latest source code and build instructions are available as well. So you can generally find all of our latest stuff. It's in Garrett. It's in Git. One of the things that we had to do, we had to think through in the last 6 months was with the Meta AGL extras and developer features, we had requests from members, maybe I don't want to add this particular thing. Maybe I don't want to add the network boot, or maybe I don't want to add the application framework. I want to test it without it. So we had to come up with some tooling around optional features. We just released that as part of Brilliant Blowfish, and this basically, if you go to AGL setup, that's our setup script now, and that basically lets you configure the optional features and the development features that you want to run with. And I had a list. I must have lost it. I had a list of all the optional development features so that you could mix and whatever you wanted to mix and match on top of the initial AGL build. We're trying to simplify that because Yocto does tend to be a little complicated when you want to just add something that we think should be relatively simple to enable to turn on or to turn off. So we have this setup script now developed. So this was the call for participation for our reference apps for basically if you had a cool app you want to show as part of our demonstration suite, or if you want to just include it in the Meta AGL demo layer and have people have the ability to contribute to it, we've asked people to. If they want to contribute something. So we've had quite a good response from this. I sent this out maybe 3 weeks ago. There's still time if you have a cool app, you're just thinking to yourself, hey, I've got something I want to do. There's still time to submit it. Basically, you send me, there's a little form to fill out and an email. I don't think I put the schedule in here, but basically we have the initial applications are due, the beta versions are due by November 15th. so that we can get them fully integrated for the CES demo. We also had probably maybe of less interest to people here, but we also had people asking, how can I get my hardware in? So we did a similar thing in terms of a call for participation from hardware vendors, and so we've had some interesting responses there as well. So we should be showing a number of new BSPs with the Charming Chinook release. We have, one of my jobs is really to make sure that people are collaborating. People know what to do people don't get stuck, basically. So we started some time ago, was a weekly developer call. Anybody is welcome to call in. If you're trying to work with AGL and you can't figure out something, call in. There's people on the call. We can usually point you in the right direction. We've also got mail lists available. I think I've got a link to how to sign up for the mail lists. And we really, particularly need developers in the middleware and the application space. And we have Jira available if you want to see all of our any open issues, and you feel you have something you might be interested in working on. Go look through the issue list, and you're more than welcome to participate. So we've got a contribution process. It's fairly lightweight at this point in terms of there's no code contribution agreement or anything required at this point in time. And the process, we try to make it as flexible as possible, and we continue to evolve it as we go. We're using, obviously, Git. We're using Garrett, despite Greg's reservations about it. And the links for finding those are here as well. So garrett.automotivelinux.org. This isn't. So we're using Jenkins for continuous integration. We just did a significant amount of work to upgrade our Jenkins infrastructure. We've been for quite a long time. We've had Jenkins builds being done on every code submission to Garrett. Now recently we're moving to, we would only build it for, I think, the Kimu build, and if that worked, everything was good. And so recently, Jan Simon did a lot of work on upgrading that, and it's now kicking off builds for all the different reference boards. And if you submit a patch, basically submit some code, it has to be successfully built by Jenkins before we can approve it. And we're moving towards adding automated testing into that as well as just a build. So having some kind of smoke test for the patches as well. So basically every day we have snapshot builds that we make available, basically binaries that are available for download that come out of Jenkins as well. This is the link for our AGL test framework, which is based on Fuego. We have a continuous integration and automated test expert group. They have a call every 2 weeks. They're very active as well. A lot of our contributors that you saw listed on there are contributing to the test framework or the test cases themselves. So if that's something you're interested in, there's definitely a lot of activity around automated testing and continuous integration. So we have some running what we call expert groups. I hate the term expert groups because we really don't actually require you to be an expert. I personally have said I don't want to be an expert in anything. It implies too much pressure. So basically we have 4 expert groups that are up and running. I think they all meet every other week except for one, the UI and graphics expert group that meets once a week on Mondays. And every expert group has a dedicated wiki page. So, and from the wiki page you can get a link to the meeting minutes, to their project backlog in Jira, to their roadmap, all sorts of good stuff from there. And so the first one we have is the app framework and security expert group. So they're in charge of obviously, or they're working on obviously the application framework and security. But then you'll see that the main topics I listed for each of the expert groups are in green. The breadth of some of the expert groups is quite large, mostly because we didn't want to form a lot of groups with only one person or 2 people that were interested. We wanted to have some critical mass to each of the groups. So we kind of bundled stuff into the expert groups that maybe don't belong there. And as we get critical mass into a particular topic, we will spin off a new expert group. So you can see App Framework also has things like diagnostics and secure boot, which may eventually get spun off. And for each of the expert groups, I included a link to their wiki page so you can quickly find them. We have UI and graphics, and this one I think has the truly strangest mix of things. It's got not just UI and graphics like the compositor and layer manager and GPU interface. It also has multimedia, the media player, a browser engine, speech rec, navigation, you name it. So kind of the separation here was the app framework guys got the core infrastructure of the application plumbing, so to speak, and the UI and the graphics guys ended up with the applications themselves, is kind of the way it fell out. We have a connectivity expert group. Again, actually their green stuff, I should move some more of their green stuff up. They're also looking at Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, connected car, and remote vehicle interactions have become hotter topics within this group. And so this is a pretty wide-ranging group, from guys like Microchip, who are interested in CAN and most connectivity, to other people who are interested in cloud connectivity. So it's a really diverse group of interests that eventually probably will get split into some kind of subgroups once we get more critical mass. So this is our continuous integration, and automated test group. So that was it for my slides. I think I still have a few minutes left for questions. And Jan Simon, did you have a question? 5 minutes? So any questions?
So I'm just trying to understand. If I want to sort of have a Raspberry Pi or an IMX board, and I want to hack install
People can hear you.
So what I was thinking while you were talking, so if I have an IMX board and a touch screen, and I want to hack install an infotainment system in my old car, how does AGL help me in terms of interacting with the car as opposed to other distribution?
So, the bottom line is what we want to have is the plumbing so that you can talk to the car in terms of a way to talk to the CAN bus. I highly doubt we'll have messages or messaging available for specific vehicles. You may have to go figure that out yourself and plug it into our system. But I do know somebody who's done that. A guy that I used to work with at Continental built his own head unit based on an old IMX35 board and plugged it into his car. So it can be done. I know some guys who've done it. So we'll have the basics, the applications available. We'll have at least the plumbing available to talk to CAN. We probably will not have the CAN message sets for particular vehicles because those tend to be very proprietary, and nobody wants to give those up.
So the target audience are the car manufacturers and the application developers.
Tier ones, because the tier ones, the way the automotive ecosystem works is the tier ones are usually responsible for delivering the final product, final IVI system. So some combination of the tier ones and the OEMs, but then enabling an ecosystem around that so that people can jump in and participate. And there's a whole tier 2, tier 3 ecosystem that's out there already. So being able to move from one IVI system to another today, if I want to move from, if I want to work on a Mercedes system this year, and move to a Toyota system next year, it's a completely different environment, and what we want to do is normalize that throughout the ecosystem.
Thank you.
Someone in the back.
I didn't notice anything about safety in your slides. Are you avoiding safety domains at this point, or is that in plans for the future?
There is a functional safety. There is a group looking at functional safety in ASIL B and ISO 26262 within AGL, but it hasn't bubbled up to the top of the list in terms of where our code has been focused.
You mentioned that there's kind of fusion of GenEV and AGL and all the other things, but how do you coordinate your roadmap in bringing in frameworks, bringing in APIs with GenEV? Is there any coordination?
There's no formal coordination. We're not GenEV members, and we do have members of AGL that are also members of GenEV, and we've incorporated some GenEV components like the IVI shell and some of the audio manager components. If one of our members is interested in bringing an GenEV component into the AGL ecosystem, by all means, bring it over. But right now we don't have any formal coordination. I call into the GenEV. Because
some points of the roadmap I've seen, they look pretty much like things we have also seen in the GenEV roadmap maybe a couple of months or already years ago, like the navigation interface.
Agreed. There's a navigation API, and we've had members ask, well, why don't you use the navigation API from GenEV? AGL specifically is not a GenEV member, so I can't just go grab the navigation spec and pull it over. So what we've said all along is, if you're a GenEV member and you're interested in bringing GenEV components in, bring them in. That's really how we're looking at collaboration. It's hard for us as non-GenEV members to get access to everything behind some of their firewalls. So. No more questions? Okay, well, hopefully I didn't spout too much gibberish in my semi-delirious state. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the week.